When it comes to the money you spend every day, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
When weather turns extreme, CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Streaming on CBS News.
It's absolutely reckless, particularly when our economy is teetering, to take this unnecessary risk.
All the concerns that were shared with me leading up to this, they're all happening right now.
I think you'll have seen the most productive 6-month stretch that anybody could remember.
Hello, I'm Major Garrett in Washington, and this is America Decides. Before we get to today's political news, we want to show you a live look from Atlanta, where hospital officials will soon provide an update on the deadly shooting there earlier today. At least one person was killed. 4 others have been hospitalized. We will continue to monitor this briefing and bring you more information as we have it. Democrats on Capitol Hill say the debt ceiling bill that passed the House Republican conference last week isn't going anywhere in the democratically controlled Senate. And now those Democrats in the Senate are holding a bill tomorrow, a hearing on that bill tomorrow. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said the hearing will shed light on what he called an extreme bill, while Republican leader Mitch McConnell has called on President Biden to do one of two things: either accept the House Republican plan or negotiate an alternative with House Republicans. Biden, for what it's worth, has invited all 4 congressional leaders to a meeting next week to discuss the debt ceiling issue, with only weeks to go before the nation possibly defaults on its debt. For more on all of this, Scott McFarland and Nancy Cordes join us now. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Nancy is CBS News' chief White House correspondent. Scott, let me talk with you first. Lots of conversations among Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill today. Give us the latest.
If you listen closely, I mean real closely, you can hear the sounds of shovels because everybody is just digging in deeper on their own side of this divide. It's becoming increasingly clear by the day as this deadline approaches. Nobody has any idea what can pass the House and pass the Senate and get the president's signature. And if they have that idea, they're not articulating it. Be it clean debt ceiling increase, be it the Republican plan, which cuts spending, or something in between. We brought those questions to senators throughout the day. Take a listen to some of the responses. At this point, do you have even 50 votes for a clean debt ceiling increase in the Senate?
I don't know the answer to that. There should be 50 votes for a clean debt ceiling because this is, the American people don't want us to default. They understand that. They don't want their interest rates to go up, and this is just a self-inflicted wound.
We will support whatever the Speaker negotiates, but it's absolutely reckless, particularly when our economy is teetering, to take this unnecessary risk and cause this unnecessary lack of confidence in our economy and in the future.
And tomorrow, the Senate Budget Committee has a hearing, mainly with scholars and economists, to talk about, according to the Democrats, all the problems with the Republican House plan. We're getting closer to the deadline, Major and Nancy, but there's no indication of any bridge being built over any divide.
Nancy, I want to pick up on Scott's point there. This hearing tomorrow meant to underscore Democratic criticism of that House Republican plan. Criticism, I'm sure, was amplified today at the White House and will be in the future.
Right, and we got a very blunt warning from the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, just a couple of hours ago. He said, Major, that if the nation does default on its debt, if Congress allows the debt ceiling to go unraised, don't count on the Fed to come in and swoop in and save the day. He said the Fed just doesn't have the ability to do that. The Fed can raise interest rates to tackle inflation, but it is not going to be able to do anything about the economic havoc that could be wreaked if Congress and a White House negotiation goes nowhere, and if the Congress doesn't do its basic duty to raise the debt ceiling.
Scott, back to you. Is there a sense in the conversations you had on the Hill today that members feel that the clock is ticking? I know you mentioned them digging in on their positions, but the clock is really ticking. We're getting closer and closer. Are they talking in ways like, we better do something?
Nobody's giving any indication of productive bipartisan discussions or even the existence of bipartisan discussions. And time is even more finite than the calendar indicates. There's an X date, a deadline of June 1st, but there are only a handful of days in which Congress is actually, here to pass things, to have bills introduced and go through some type of process. And we've heard it for the first time today, a senator saying we may need to add days to the calendar, skip home district work periods, skip recesses or weekends, and get to this. Take a listen to Senator Ben Ray Lujan, Democrat from New Mexico.
All the concerns that were shared with me leading up to this, they're all happening right now. And with 7 legislative days in the Senate that are currently scheduled, something has to be done. And I'm certainly hopeful that we'll hear that third week when the Senate is supposed to be on recess, that goes away.
There's no way through this, Major, without some new political complexion, some coalition that forms. We have yet to see this Congress of Democrats and Republicans working together toward an end goal. It'd be a very novel thing in this Congress at this moment.
Nancy, I want to play for you some sound from today's White House briefing. Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, talking about whether or not the United States could ever or should ever be a defaulting nation. Let's listen.
We cannot be a deadbeat nation. We cannot. This is something that we have been able to do in the past, 78 times since 1960. 78 times since 1960. We have always paid our debt. This country has always paid our debt. So what's different now? What is different now? That's something for congressional Republicans to answer.
So, Nancy, the question, this meeting at the White House next week, is it the opening of negotiations or something different?
It is the opening of negotiations, Major, even though the White House is going to continue to insist that it isn't. They are trying to make the case right now that the president has always been happy to sit down and talk about the budget and sit down with to talk about spending cuts with the House Speaker, but that is a conversation that is separate from the need to raise the debt limit. Now, that's just semantics, because obviously President Biden would not be sitting down to have that conversation over spending cuts at this point in time if he didn't need to do something to reach a compromise with Republicans that would cause them to vote to raise that debt ceiling. So there's no question that these two things are linked, even if the White House continues to insist they are not. However, even though it is a positive sign that that these congressional leaders are now going to be sitting down with the president, they are still so far apart, as Scott pointed out. Republicans want to cut $100 billion from the budget. The White House wants to cut nowhere near that much, and they want to cut different things. And so the prospect of these two sides reaching some kind of compromise that will be acceptable to both of them and reaching that compromise in a matter of weeks, it's very difficult to see how they do that right now.
And Nancy, from the White House perspective, it's clear that Senate Republicans are basically saying negotiations have to flow through the House Republican Conference. So whatever deal that emerges or is cut or is agreed to by the president has to go through House Republicans. It doesn't seem like Senate Republicans are really involving themselves here. That raises two interesting questions. One, the House Republican Conference more conservative than the Senate Republican Conference, and the president himself less experienced negotiating with House Republicans than he is with his former Senate colleagues.
Exactly. President Biden would love to be able to have this negotiation with the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell. They have known each other. They have cut many deals over the past few decades. But while Leader McConnell will be at this meeting next week, he's making it very clear that he's taking a back seat to the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, for a couple of reasons. First of all, House Republicans are going to be very suspicious of any deal that is not cut by their own leader. And Leader McConnell knows this. And beyond that, McCarthy is on shaky ground himself, and he needs to be able to show that he has the power to go toe-to-toe with the president. So for those reasons and several others, this is going to be a deal, if it does get cut, that is cut at the end of the day between President Biden and the House Speaker.
And, Scott, quickly before we go, this hearing tomorrow clearly appears to be designed to accomplish one goal from the Democratic perspective: increase the political heat on Republicans for things that they want to cut in the future. Is that what this is about?
Both sides are desperately grasping around for some piece of leverage. Hearings, press conferences, we'll see a bunch of those. But there's no indication either side has amassed an effective or breakthrough amount of leverage. And it's no indication that's going to change in the next 28 days.
Scott McFarlane and Nancy Cordes, thank you. Republican presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson is doing what some other Republican contenders for that nomination are not doing. What's that? Criticizing Donald Trump. He joins us next to discuss his 2024 campaign. You are streaming America Decides.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift. I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way. Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We go to stories because we can bring someone to that story. That human connection is incredibly important. The news doesn't have to be depressing.
What do you love about running? Energy!
It can be uplifting.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson is criticizing fellow Republican candidate Donald Trump. He did so in a recent op-ed. In a piece titled, "Donald Trump Has Led Us Astray," Hutchinson writes in part, "He has undermined the fabric of our democracy," citing election denialism and the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. For more, Asa Hutchinson joins us now from his hometown of Bentonville, Arkansas. Governor, why did you feel now was the time to write such a piece about former President Trump?
Well, if you're going to be in the campaign for President of the United States, you need to be clear on where you stand and what you offer that's different to the alternative. In this case, of course, Donald Trump is highest in the polls. And so it's like running against an incumbent in many ways. And so you got to make your case. And whenever you look at times of division in our country, and we've had times of division before, we've always had leaders that have overcome that division and tried to pull our country together. And yet we see with Donald Trump, we see people feeding on the division and taking advantage of that division and increasing that division. And that's not what we need. And it's not just Mr. Trump, but it is also President Biden doing the same thing. We need leaders that will try to bring people together and not feed on the division. We're principled. We know where we stand. There's going to be a difference of issues, but let's not intentionally divide America.
Governor, in that op-ed, you said there is something about the Republican Party that has lost its way. I want to cite for you a 2021 poll done by the Public Religion Research Institute. It's their annual American Values Survey. And in that poll, 30% of Republicans said, quote, because the country is so off the track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save our country. I presume you disagree with that. What I want to know is, how do you talk to those Republicans and explain to them they're wrong?
Well, first of all, I do disagree with it. Obviously, I believe in our democratic systems and our institutions, and we need leaders, again, that will restore confidence in our institutions. You do that by reform. You do that by telling the truth and providing leadership and problem solving. Whenever you look at 30% of the Republicans in that poll believe that some extreme measures are necessary. I disagree with that, but also it's important to talk to them and to speak the truth and to speak reason. And then you also understand how important the 70% are that disagree with that. And whenever I'm running for office, I think 70% of the vote's pretty good. And so we've got a broad base in the Republican Party that see our country needing to make a course correction, needing to stay away from that extremism, and say we need to, once again, address the problems that face America. And the number one issue in the 2024 campaign is going to be the economy. We're seeing it struggling. We see the interest rates going up. People are hurting. It's going to get worse. We've got to have leaders that will address that and not simply talk about division and the past.
Governor, you mentioned a moment ago the importance of telling the truth and poll in the 70% range. Well, in our most recent CBS poll, 75% of those who say they support President Trump say that he won in 2020. When you go to Iowa and New Hampshire, as you will next week going to New Hampshire, will you tell people who believe Trump won in 2020, no, he didn't win. You need to get over that, and we need to move on?
Well, actually, I was in Iowa yesterday. I was in a GOP county meeting, and they asked me my view on the last election, and I told the truth that, we lost. President Biden won the election. Now, there was a little bit of hissing going on, but, we moved beyond that, and we talked about the ideas for the future, and we understood that we might not agree on every point, but if we can agree on the broad principles of where we need to go as a nation, then we can be friends and allies. And so that's how I address it. They raise it. I'll respond to it truthfully, but we move beyond that. This Republican Party has to be about the future and meeting head on the issues that every family faces in America and is concerned about.
Governor, you said the economy will be the number one issue. The White House says right now it's House Republicans who are jeopardizing the future of the U.S. economy by not raising the debt ceiling without requiring the White House to agree to spending cuts it opposes. Do you support the House Republican plan and this idea that without those spending cuts, there will be no increase in the debt ceiling?
Well, first of all, my understanding of it is that there's a 1% increase and holding increase in federal spending to that level. The important thing is to have a framework as to how we're going to control federal spending in the future. And the President of the United States needs to agree to that framework. And because it's the Biden economy right now that's struggling, and it started out with excessive federal spending that he created and other administrations created. But it has to be brought under control. That is the heart of the problem in terms of inflation and high interest rates and what the feds did today. And so, absolutely, I think there needs to be a framework that ought to be agreed to, and President Biden ought to come along and say, sure, we're going to have an extension of the debt, but I have no problem saying these are steps we need to take to control federal spending. The Republicans put one out there. Obviously, the president needs to show his hands as to how he wants to control that, and then we move forward.
Very quickly, Governor, I want to remind people of something from your early term in public service. In 1985, as a U.S. attorney, you helped negotiate the end of a 3-day siege with some survivalist, Christian identity, white supremacists in Arkansas. You donned a flak jacket and went in there knowing they were armed. Would you have gone in there if you had known they had AR-15s?
Well, yes, because that was what I saw as my duty. I had a flak jacket on. I was with the hostage rescue team, and it was a successful operation. And so, yeah, the answer is yes. I would do it again the same way, and I hope we'd have as safe an outcome as we did then. After 3 days of an armed standoff, they surrendered peacefully. It was one of the most successful law enforcement operations we've had in our state.
Do you have any misgivings on the wide availability of AR-15s in this country and their continued involvement in mass shootings in our nation?
Well, it should trouble anyone whenever we have any weapon that causes mass casualties, death. And so it is a concern. I've thought about it this morning as to where we are as a nation and how do we address this. And so we ought to continue the conversation as to what makes a difference. And it starts with the heart of man that takes up an instrument and causes death and destruction, and the mental illness that is out there that has to be addressed. If there's things that we can agree upon that will make a difference, we ought to be talking about them.
Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, we thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Major.
And tomorrow night, my colleague Robert Costa will be anchoring this program, and he will be joined by another governor. Bob spoke to New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who is, like some other Republicans, considering a run for the presidency himself.
I'll probably make a decision in the next month or so, just because that's the logistics timing that a candidate would need to really make sure that they, meet all the markers, get ballot access, and make sure that they can run a truly competitive race.
Make a note for yourself to tune in tomorrow to see more of Bob's conversation with New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis scores several victories during his state's legislative session, at least he characterizes them as such. How will that impact a potential White House bid? That comes next. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony Dvoldar from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. The Florida legislative session is in its final days. Why does that matter? Well, because Republican Governor Ron DeSantis has signed several high-profile bills that he may well use as a springboard for a 2024 presidential campaign. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Tallahassee. Ed, what is the governor talking about, and is it something he will likely use as fodder for a run for the Republican nomination?
He sure will. Today at an event in Jupiter, Florida, down in Palm Beach County, he called it one of the most successful legislative sessions anywhere in the country in years. It's involved things like passing environmental legislation, affordable housing legislation, pay raises for teachers, tax cuts on household incomes or household goods that went with overwhelming bipartisan support. It's the trickier, more partisan stuff that gets criticized by people in and outside the state that, of course, has drawn all the attention. Today, just today, we witnessed as the Florida State Senate put final passage on an expansion of that so-called Don't Say Gay bill that now bars teachers from any discussion of gender identity or sexual orientation in the classroom up to grade 8, expanding it up from grade 3. Republican supporters saying it was necessary because parents have been calling and urging them to do so. The governor is expected to sign all of this, whether it has bipartisan support or not. The woman who's helping push it through is State Senate President Kathleen Pasadomo from the Naples area. And we talked to her not only about the substance of the legislation, but also about what's on the minds of a lot of people in the hallways of the state capitol here, the plans for Governor DeSantis to run for president. Take a look. You have not endorsed Governor DeSantis for president, right?
Well, he's not running for president.
Okay. If he runs for president, would you endorse him?
I don't know. He hasn't asked me.
Okay. Interesting.
He does it. I'll joke with him. I have a very good relationship with him. I really like the man. And I joke, hey, how you run? He said, I got better. I'm working. I'm the governor. I got things to do. He has never once said, I'm running for president, ever.
To you?
To me.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what he says to others.
Would he make a good president?
I think he would.
Why?
Because he's decisive. He's very smart. He knows where he wants to go, and he's got some good ideas.
So
convenient for these Republican legislators to not have any conversation yet with the governor about running for president because he hasn't officially done so. We asked several of them, and they continue to say, well, he isn't a candidate for president, so I really don't want to go there. But it is an awkward dance they have to dance because, of course, he's thinking about it, and former President Donald Trump, a Florida resident, is already doing it, and they understand the dynamics in the Republican Party. Real quick, Major, Democrats powerless to stop this legislation from getting through. They're especially concerned about the passage of a 6-week abortion services ban now in this state, even while courts are debating whether or not to ban a 15-week ban. We spoke with the Democratic leader of the House, a woman named Fentrice Driscoll, who says, may be popular with Republicans, but come time for a general election, Governor DeSantis could have problems given all this legislation. Take a look. What is the Democratic take on what's been passed and what's been done?
Sure. So as I look at this legislative session, to me, if I had a theme, if I had to wrap it up in one theme, it would actually be anti-freedom. And it's so interesting because Governor DeSantis travels the country with his freedom blueprint or whatever it is that he calls it. But if you look at the actual policies that he's passed here, they've all been anti-freedom. The attacks on women with the 6-week abortion ban, before most women even know that they're pregnant. He got it as close to an outright ban as he could. And by the way, most Americans and most Floridians don't agree with that ban. Permitless carry. Just before that bill passed, there was a University of North Florida poll saying that 77% of Floridians thought it was a bad bill. He passed it anyway. He's always looking over the shoulders. He is focused on being a bully against democracy, diversity, and Disney. And that's what he cares about. Our opinions could not be more opposite.
Ed O'Keefe in Tallahassee, we thank you. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You are streaming CBS News.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings.